The wacky world of MultimediaJay.
Howdy folks, so I guess I've been getting back into cartridge-based gaming lately, and having said goodbye to a game for the first time ever, I don't think I've ever willingly gotten rid of video games before prior to last weekend when I said goodbye to Beyond Good and Evil on PS2 in order to, because I've replaced it with the HD remake that's downloadable. I might pick up another copy of it later if it, I might pick up another copy of it at some point later on if I ever, for whatever reason, want that version of the game back. But with the issues with PS2 Slims and the sound repeating glitch that's in that game, not so sure. So, considering I've kind of gotten into some, but not really gotten into, I've gotten into some game hunting, but I'm not one of those crazy collectors who will buy something just because it's cheap. And I'm certainly not going to buy something just to flip it on eBay. I'm actually looking for games to buy to actually play again, because I'm actually interested in playing them again, not to sit in front of a bunch of game cartridges or Nintendo cartridges or game boxes or something along those lines to film videos and stuff like that. So I don't want to be one of those guys that just shows off a collection that isn't actually enjoyed. So, since I've kind of gotten into this kind of stuff, I figured, why don't we just start a mini-series of where I'm starting from in terms of games, and just talk about what I have and things along those lines, and just go through the collection little by little and talk about these kinds of things. Beginning with some what appear to be odds and ends here. Obviously, Mickey Mania Genesis cartridge on top of some Nintendo cartridges, or tapes, if anyone remembers when people used to call them tapes, because they were plastic cases just like VHS tapes, so of course that must mean that they're tapes too, right? Hey, you gonna go play your Nintendo tapes later? Whatever. So it's an interesting combination because it's kind of odds and ends. We've got cartridge systems where I don't have a lot of cartridge systems represented, I should say, where I don't have a lot of cartridges, yes, and portables. So I figured let's knock those out in a first kind of discussion on what I'm starting with, and then do some other videos later on for updates or something along those lines. I still got to make a secondhand schmecondhand playlist for all of this. But I figured let's just go through them, split them up by platform or groups of platforms, and have a little discussion about what I have. So, everything you see here is basically what I have for cartridges that isn't something where I have a lot of them, like Super Nintendo and N64, so I was going to knock them all out at once, so we're going to talk about Genesis, NES, and portables. So first and foremost, obviously, as you saw in the last video that I did, or in the last update, Mickey Mania, The Timeless Adventures of Mickey Mouse. This is one of the few Genesis games that I actually want to have the cartridge for. See, I had a Super Nintendo during the 16-bit wars, but my aversion to Genesis games isn't entirely because of that. It's not because of that. I'm not trying to rekindle old fights here, but Mickey Mania, the reason why I specifically wanted this cartridge is because it's a decent platformer, and of course my family being fans of Disney and stuff like that, it's kind of nice that they got the cartoon elements in this game and stuff like that. So, and of course references to a lot of old Mickey Mouse animated movies. I've seen a few of them actually when I was a kid, so it's great that they combined, you know, big screen animated Disney stuff and a platformer into a pretty decent game. The reason why I wanted this in cartridge format specifically, and the reason why I don't really get a lot of Genesis games, is because I've kind of spoiled the Genesis as a platform. First, multiplats between Genesis and Super Nintendo, in nearly all cases, the Super Nintendo version was better. This is one of the few exceptions. The Super Nintendo version, I've seen it, but the Genesis version seems to have more work put into it. A higher amount of sound effects and digitized speech. Interestingly enough, even though the Super Nintendo was better than the Genesis hardware-wise, this game actually uses the Genesis's more a couple of years older resources a lot better than the Super Nintendo one did. If you haven't seen this game yet, check for a long play of the Genesis version compared to the SNES version, and you'll be able to understand very quickly why I prefer this over SNES. There's a Sega CD version too that's something else altogether, but as far as cartridges go, Genesis definitely. One of the problems I have with Genesis games, besides issues with multiplats, is that I've spoiled my my interest in Genesis cartridges with the Sonic Ultimate Genesis Collection on PS3. So Yep, so that's one of the few Genesis games that I actually want to get at this point. I'm thinking I might pick up some kind of Mortal Kombat and Tasmania too. In the case of Tasmania in the 16-bit days as a multiplat actually was two different games on SNES and Genesis. Alright, moving along to NES, the only three Nintendo games that I have right now. None of them are part of my original collection when I was a kid. By the way, I didn't have a Genesis when I was a kid either, so I did play a few Genesis games, played Sonic and this, and a couple of sports games and some other games as well, but not in too much of a rush to hunt those down anytime soon, although I did see Tasmania complete in box in the secondhand store that I've been getting these cartridges from, so I don't know, if they can get a cart-only version of it, I might check it out. Alright, let's get into NES. None of these NES games are from my original childhood collection because my folks sadly gave away all my Nintendo stuff when I was off at college. They never thought that I would want any of that stuff back. Big mistake. And it's totally inexcusable because my dad went through this with his baseball card collection. My grandparents gave away his baseball card collection thinking he'd never want it back. But then he found out that some of the cards he had would have been worth quite a bit of money if he'd kept them. So, unbelievable. Generational slip-up, and nobody learns from the lessons of the past. So, this is the beginning of me attempting to rebuild some kind of NES collection, which won't be easy, because some of the games I had on NES are now considered rare by the price-gouging resellers, so it might actually cost a decent amount of money to get those games back. Parents. There's no need to argue. Parents just don't understand. So here's what I have so far. I used to have a collection of NES games that would take up a whole shoebox. They could fill a shoebox with them, and they gave all of them away because they didn't think I'd ever want them back. Yeah. Anywho, we'll slowly pick up the pieces here. Plus, some of these games have their interests in reacquiring the cartridge spoiled by the Virtual Console. Alright, Rad Racer. Ratty Racer. Did not have this one as a kid, played it over a couple friends' houses, never got past the first course. I'm happy to report that in less than 2 weeks after picking up this cartridge and fixing it up, I have gotten past the first level in Rad Racer. I know about its sequel too, but the sequel is blatant sequelitis. And to give an example of how, I guess the other retro gamers around here know that too, because at the secondhand shop, this was the only Rad Racer, and they've had about 5 or 6 copies of Rad Racer 2 on the shelves every time I stop by. So, yeah, the thing too is, I don't think there are a lot of retro collectors around here that aren't resellers, because I've kept an eye out on what generally they had on their shelf in the retro sections, and that stuff just doesn't move. If it's a cartridge, NES, SNES, N64, even though they're selling Yobo and there's another Famiclone they're selling, FC3 Plus. No, they sell Yobos. They sell even though they're selling Yobo Famiclones and like FC Twins and stuff for that kind of for those kinds of systems, their stock still doesn't change very much. Bugs Bunny Birthday Blowout. I did not agree with the AVGN's treatment of this game in his review. I actually found it to be a somewhat decent platformer, obviously made for little kids, so it's really easy, and there's some frame rate issues, which is weird to be saying that about an NES game, but compared to the Bugs Bunny Crazy Castle at the time, I actually found Birthday Blowout to be a lot more fun, and this was a popular rental for me, although I unfortunately never had it in my childhood collection. This sucker the cartridge is still shiny and everything, is in like-new condition, works great, and it was the first game I ever got, my first NES game in years, ever since losing my collection. This was the one that started it all. Put that in your pipe and smoke it, AVGN. So yeah, this was the game that I rebooted my NES collection with, and yeah, it's still playable. I mean, it's just this is from when Bugs Bunny turned 50 all those years ago, so everything was happy birthday Bugs. There were even specials on Nickelodeon back then, but I really like the condition of this. Of course, the big reason why I got this game at all to restart my NES collection was to test the NES capabilities of the Retro Duo, so which is now pretty much retired, and the Nintendo World Cup. If I only wish this were my original cartridge from my childhood. It's in good enough condition to be the original cartridge. This is very rare. It's a sport, not rare, but it's not a rare game, but it's rare in terms of what it is in gaming these days. This is a sports game that's not tied to a specific year. It's basically Technos Japan soccer. It's like River City Ransom meets soccer and stuff like that. This game actually got me into soccer when I was a kid, and I actually got a soccer ball and messed around with it at recess in school, and kicked it around the parks and the backyard and stuff like that. I actually did play a little bit of soccer recreationally because of this game. So one of the things I like, though, this is the kind of game you don't really see much anymore, because it's a sports game, but it's not tied to a specific year. So this game actually still is playable nowadays. It's not like, say, Madden 98 or something, where, do I really want to relive the 1990s, the usually 1 year before season, by picking up an old Madden game or something like that. Or in the case of more recent year-based sports games, games where, say, EA turned off the multiplayer after 2 years or something stupid like that. But that's all I have for NES so far, sadly. I would have much more if my folks hadn't given away those games, but what are you going to do? Alright, portables. We'll go over the systems first. These were originally these were originally blackout systems, as I call them. Blackout systems, battery-powered systems that I went out and bought during long blackouts and some of the storms we've had to play some video games and charge them with my car jump starter, which I really don't need in the summertime, so I use it as a giant battery pack when the lights go out, and it charges off of my cigarette lighter in my car when I'm going to and from work, so I can actually charge it with my car if the charge gets too low, and then just go to the gas station. So the first portable system, I actually went out and bought the Nintendo Game Boy Advance, and then the DS came out and got that very shortly afterwards. So Game Boy Advance SP. Game Boy Advance SP didn't like that it didn't have stereo sound. Yay, striped shirt. It's one of the good ones, though. It's got the backlight, not the front. It's backlit and not frontlit. AGS 101 instead of AGS 001, the horrendous original with the horrible-looking screen. So, interestingly enough, the battery still holds a charge, even though it hasn't been plugged in a long time. Although it starts giving me low battery warnings just from this. Yeah, see that? The screen doesn't, the backlight doesn't turn off, which is how you know it's a good one. Doesn't hold much of a charge anymore, and I don't really have much of a reason to play this anymore because it only does mono sound. There's no headphone jack, and yeah, the battery isn't doing too well in terms of holding charges. So I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I could sell it. I understand these things go for a decent amount on eBay, but do I want to go to all the trouble to get rid of it when it needs a new battery? Then there's this piece of junk, my original form factor DS with that's pretty much broken at this point. Yeah. Wow, pitiful. It was never that great of a system. I actually favored the Game Boy Advance over this for playing my GBA games because it was just awful. I mean, the screens weren't very bright. They basically repeated the mistakes of the original Game Boy Advance with this when it came out. So, blech. Plus the hard plastic buttons. Everything else I'd had from Nintendo was either softer plastic or more rubbery, but it didn't really work very well. Nowadays, I use it as an alarm clock. Yep, this is my alarm clock nowadays, and my actual alarm clock is a backup in case this thing doesn't go off. For actual playing DS games, I have a DS Lite for now. I'm not going to... So I picked one of these up, and I really liked the improvements over the original DS, and I haven't really had much of a reason to buy anything else, because I found out that outside of blackouts, I don't really play portables all that much. I don't really, I go to all the trouble to have the big screen here, and the big screen, and the speaker system, and stuff like that, so there isn't much of a reason for me to play portables and look at a little 2-inch screen with headphones on. So that's changing, though. I could use this to play Game Boy Advance, but I'm actually got a Super Retro Advance on the way that'll let the Super Retro Trio play GBA. And for Nintendo DS, I'm thinking of eventually getting a 3DS XL if there isn't some kind of DS adapter that does what Super Retro Advance does later on down the road. 3DS XL, so I can at least have a larger screen and send everything through send the headphones through my sound system to play games that way. So what do I have for portables these days? I used to have an original creamed spinach Game Boy with a bunch of games, and my folks gave that away too. So that's 2 collections they've given away. Whatever. So, basically Final Fantasy games. These were games to be played during blackouts, and I didn't mind revisiting classic Final Fantasies during blackouts. So that's basically it for Game Boy Advance. Dawn of Souls 4, 5, and 6. All good games. All good games. They're basically ports of the Super Nintendo versions that were in 16-bit and stuff like that, 2D. And with the Super Retro Advance, I'm wondering if I'll even want to bother tracking down any Super Nintendo carts like Final Fantasy 2 and Final Fantasy 3. Although I do have FF2, the FF2 SNES release on Wii Virtual Console. So all these were first-hand games. All of these were first-hand games that I got for playing in blackouts, but now, with Super Retro Advance on the way, I'll be able to play these as home titles now, and have them in the ballpark of, like, Super Nintendo's ballpark in terms of what they look like. So, I'm eventually planning on getting some more GBAs when the Super Retro Advance comes in, probably the Mario Advance series, say the least, because of the value-added improvements to the various Mario games that they redid on the GBA and some other stuff as well, since GBA is now going to be kind of like a home console for me with the Super Retro Advance. Might as well check it out. Alright, and DS. Nintendo DS. I'm not too quick to buy DS games because, of course, I only have that little thing to play them on. If I can ever get a 3DS XL, I might get some secondhand DS games later on. But so yeah, not really too thrilled with this. Super Mario 64 DS. Of course, I liked Super Mario 64, and I like the value-added stuff that they put into this DS remake. Pretty decent stuff. Final Fantasy 3, the 3D remake, which I now have on Steam, so I don't have much of a reason to play this anymore. Final Fantasy 4, the 3D remake, which maybe that'll go to Steam one of these days too, and I can just get that instead. And then Mario Kart DS. It was a decent Mario Kart game, but unfortunately, while the online component was still online, you pretty much weren't competitive if you weren't a good snaker. Which is why I'm glad when Mario Kart Wii came out, they got rid of snaking and made it, and nerfed it. Because, yeah, happy that there were nerfs in a console game. Because if you ever played Mario Kart DS online, it wasn't even close. You would always lose to the snakers every single time if you weren't snaking like a pro or something like that. So that's it for the odd and end systems, the portables, and the stuff that my folks gave away. I do have some stuff on the way that I will do a pickup video for when it arrives from JJ Games. Shout-outs to JJ Games. And I will keep giving them shout-outs as long as they keep providing good service and decent products. So, yeah, we'll be checking that out. But that's the odds and ends systems right for now. And we'll get into some other systems later on where I actually have decent amounts of games. So, till next time, this is MultimediaJay, signing off. Thanks for stopping by.